3 days after their close call with the Null Patrol, Tai-Ho and Bake reached the small town of Duri. Once home to a few hundred people, it now stood empty and broken. The Null had taken what they wanted and left. "We need supplies," Tai-Ho told Buck as they looked down at the town from a hill. "Food, medicine, maybe some batteries." Buck's ears twitched, but he showed no signs of danger. Still, they waited until dusk before moving in. Safer that way. The streets were quiet except for the wind pushing trash around. Tai-Ho held his rifle ready as Buck walked ahead, sniffing the ground. They passed empty homes with broken windows and doors, left open by people who had fled in a hurry. Tai-Ho pointed to a small store. "There, let's check it out." Inside, most shelves were empty. Tai-Ho found a few cans of food that others had missed. He put them in his backpack and moved to the medicine aisle. Some bandages and pain pills remained. Better than nothing. A sudden bark from Bake made Tai-Ho spin around, rifle raised. The wolf stood tense, facing the back door of the store. "Who's there?" Tai-Ho called out. "Show yourself." Silence. Then a small voice. "Don't shoot. I'm human." A woman stepped slowly into view from behind a shelf. She was thin, with short black hair and tired eyes. Her clothes were dirty, and she carried a small bag over her shoulder. She held up empty hands. "My name is Jia," she said. "I'm not looking for trouble." Tai-Ho kept his rifle pointed at her. "How did you survive? Where did you come from?" Jia's eyes darted to Buck, who was still growling softly. "I escaped from a Null work camp 2 weeks ago. Been hiding, moving at night. You're the first human I've seen since then." Tai-Ho studied her. She could be telling the truth, or she could be a trap. The Null sometimes used humans to find other survivors. "Your wolf," Jia said. "He's one of the military projects, isn't he? From the Canine Enhancement Program." Tai-Ho blinked in surprise. "How do you know about that?" "I was a scientist before the invasion, a xenobiologist. I studied animal behavior and later alien biology." She took a careful step forward. "Your wolf is special. And that might be important." Bake had stopped growling. He looked at Jia with curious eyes now. "Why should I trust you?" Tai-Ho asked. "Because I know things about the Null that could help us fight back." Jia's voice grew stronger. "They're not invincible. They have a weakness." Outside, a distant sound made them all freeze. The humming of a Null scout ship. Buck's ears perked up. "We need to move," Tai-Ho said, making a quick decision. "You can come with us, or stay here. Your choice." "I'm coming with you," Jia said without hesitation. They slipped out the back door just as lights from the scout ship swept over the main street. Staying low, they moved between buildings until they reached the edge of town. The forest offered safety in its darkness. As they hiked through the night, Jia explained what she knew. The Null aren't just random insects. They're a colony with a strict order. Each region has an overseer that controls the others. Like a queen bee, but more powerful. She paused to catch her breath. "When I was in the camp, I saw how they communicate. It's some kind of telepathy. The workers can't think for themselves if the leader isn't giving orders." Tai-Ho looked at her with new interest. "And how does that help us?" "If we can kill an overseer, all the Null under its control will be confused, maybe even helpless." Jia glanced at Buck. "And your wolf might be the key." The enhanced animals were the only things that seemed to disrupt their telepathic field. That's why the Null tried to destroy all the research facilities first. Bake walked closer to Jia now, as if he understood her words. He sniffed her hand and then looked up at Tai-Ho. "He trusts you," Tai-Ho said, surprised. "He doesn't trust easily." Jia smiled for the first time. "Maybe he knows we need each other." As dawn broke, they reached a small cave where Tai-Ho had stored some supplies. They were all tired, but a new energy filled the air between them. For the first time since the invasion, Tai-Ho felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The hidden bunker was small but safe. Built into the side of a mountain years before the invasion, it had once been a military emergency shelter. Now it was home to Tai-Ho Budik and their new companion, Jia. "This is impressive," Jia said, looking around at the supplies Tai-Ho had gathered. Canned food lined one wall. Water jugs sat in a corner. A radio set with spare parts took up a small table. Tai-Ho shrugged. "It keeps us alive." Bake lay near the entrance, head on his paws but eyes alert. The wolf had accepted Jia as part of their small pack now. "So tell me more about this overseer," Tai-Ho said as he heated water on a small stove. "How do we find it? How do we kill it?" Jia sat on a metal chair and pulled out a folded paper from her pocket. She opened it to reveal a rough map. "The Nul have set up their main base in the old capital city," she said, pointing to the map. "I saw transport ships landing there daily when I was in the work camp. The biggest ship landed 3 days before I escaped. That has to be the overseer's ship." Tai-Ho studied the map. The capital was about 60 miles away, a long journey through dangerous territory. "And you think Bake can help us fight this overseer?" he asked. Jia nodded. When the enhanced animals were near, the Nul soldiers seemed confused. Their movements became jerky, like they couldn't hear their orders clearly. She looked at Bake with wonder. Something about the enhanced animals disrupts their telepathic link. As if understanding, Bake lifted his head and let out a soft howl. The sound echoed strangely in the small bunker. Tai-Ho frowned. "That's weird." "What?" Jia asked. "Listen." Tai-Ho motioned for Bak to howl again. The wolf did, and this time both humans noticed how the radio on the table crackled with static during the howl. Jia's eyes widened. The frequency. His howl is creating interference with radio waves. She rushed to the radio and turned some dials. Tai-Ho, this might be even better than I thought. Over the next few days, they ran tests. Bak would howl at different pitches, while Jia measured the effect on various electronic devices. Tai-Ho watched in amazement as the scientist in Jia came alive. "The Nul use a frequency similar to our radio waves for their telepathy," she explained. "If we can amplify Bak's howls with the right equipment, we might be able to completely block the Overseer's control over its soldiers." "Where do we get this equipment?" Tai-Ho asked. Jia pointed to a location on the map. "There's a radio station here, about 10 miles away. If it hasn't been destroyed, it should have what we need." Tai-Ho nodded slowly as a plan formed in his mind. "So we get the equipment, make our way to the capital. And then what? We can't just walk up to the Overseer and ask it to listen to Bug howl." "The work camps," Jia said. "They're bringing humans into the city every day. If we could get captured on purpose." "No," Tai-Ho cut her off. "Too risky. Then we need another way in." Jia studied the map again. The old subway tunnels might still be intact. They could lead us right under the Null base. Tai-Ho considered this. It was dangerous, but it might work. And once we're there, we use Bak's howls to disrupt their communication, then strike at the Overseer while it's vulnerable. Jia nodded. "Exactly. Without the Overseer, the rest will fall into chaos." Bake stood up and walked to Tai-Ho's side, pressing against his leg. The wolf seemed to sense the importance of their plan. "It won't be easy," Tai-Ho said, placing a hand on Bak's head. "But it's our best chance to fight back." That night, as Jia slept, Tai-Ho sat by the bunker entrance with Bake. The stars shone brightly above the dark mountains. "What do you think, boy?" he whispered. "Can we really do this?" Bake looked up at him with intelligent eyes that seemed to say yes. For the first time since the invasion, Tai-Ho allowed himself to imagine a world free from the Null. A world where humans could rebuild. A world worth fighting for. Tomorrow, they would begin their journey to the radio station. The first step in their dangerous mission. The morning was cold as Tai-Ho, Jia, and Bake left the safety of the bunker. They carried only what they needed: food, water, weapons, and tools for the radio equipment. We should reach the radio station by nightfall, Taiho said, studying their map. Then it's a long walk to the capital. The first few hours of hiking were quiet. Bike led the way, his nose testing the air for any sign of null patrols. The mountains slowly gave way to rolling hills covered in thick forest. "Look," Ja whispered, pointing through the trees. In the valley below, they saw a null work camp. Humans in ragged clothes moved heavy boxes from one building to another. Tall insect-like guards watched them with weapons ready. "That's where I was held," Gia said. Her voice shook slightly. "They're mining metals the Nu will need for their ships." Taiho put a hand on her shoulder. "We're going to stop them." They moved carefully around the camp, staying hidden in the trees. Buck growled softly when the wind carried the alien scent toward them. By midday, they reached a road that cut through the forest. Once busy with cars, it was now empty except for occasional null transport vehicles. "We need to cross," Taiho said, "but we should wait and watch first." They hid in the bushes near the road for an hour. 2 null transports passed, carrying large containers. "What's in those?" Taiho asked. Jia's face darkened. "Resources. Sometimes metals. Sometimes people." When the road was clear, they ran across quickly and continued their journey. The terrain changed as they moved farther from the mountains. They passed abandoned farms with empty fields. "I grew up near here," Gia said as they walked through an apple orchard. "My family had a small house in the next town." "Do you think they?" Taiho started. Gia shook her head. "I don't know. I hope they got away." Around mid-afternoon, they heard the buzzing of a null scout ship. They dived under a fallen tree, just as the ship flew overhead, its sensors scanning the ground. "That was close," Taiho whispered when the ship had passed. They moved more carefully after that, using every bit of cover they could find. Bach stayed close, his enhanced senses their best warning system. As the sun began to set, they reached the edge of a small town. The radio station tower stood on a hill, still intact. "There it is," Jia said. "But we need to be careful. The knoll might have guards there." Taiho nodded and turned to Bake. "Go check it out, boy." Quietly. The wolf slipped away into the growing darkness. While they waited, Taiho and Jia shared some dried meat and water. "Why did you join the military?" Jia asked. Taiho was quiet for a moment. "My father was a soldier. And his father before him. It seemed like the right path." He looked at the stars that were beginning to appear. "Never thought I'd be fighting aliens, though." "You're good at it," Jia said with a small smile. "Fighting, I mean." "I'm good at surviving," Taiho corrected her. "There's a difference." Bake returned before they could talk more. The wolf seemed calm, which was a good sign. "No guards?" Taiho asked. Bake gave a soft bark that Taiho took as confirmation. "Let's go then. We need that equipment if we're going to make it to the capital." They moved toward the radio station, staying in the shadows of empty buildings. The town was silent around them, a ghost of its former self. "Once we get what we need," Jia said, "the real challenge begins." Taiho checked his rifle. One step at a time. First the radio parts, then the capital, then the overseer. "Then freedom," Jia added. Beck suddenly stopped, his ears perked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Taiho raised his hand, signaling Jia to stop. "What is it, boy?" The wolf's eyes fixed on something ahead. In the dim light, they could just make out movement near the radio station entrance. It wasn't null. It was human. Taiho raised his rifle, aiming at the shadowy figures near the radio station. Bach stood ready to attack. Jia held her breath. "Who's there?" A voice called out. "Show yourselves." Taiho and Jia exchanged glances. The voice was human, but that didn't mean it was safe. "We mean no harm," Taiho answered carefully. "We're just looking for supplies." A man stepped forward, holding a gun. He was tall with a thin face and short hair. 4 more people appeared behind him, all armed. A man, a woman, and a wolf, the tall man said. Strange group to be out after curfew. Curfew? Ja asked. The man studied them closely. You're not from around here, are you? I'm Han. These are my people. We keep watch over this area. Taiho slowly lowered his rifle. I'm Taiho. This is Ja and Baek. We need radio equipment. Han's eyes widened when he looked at Baek. That's not a normal wolf. No, Taiho agreed. He's not. After a tense moment, Han lowered his gun. Come inside. It's not safe out here. Null patrols fly by every few hours. They followed Han's group into the radio station. Inside, they found more people, about 20 in all. Some were cooking over small fires. Others cleaned weapons. Children slept in a corner, wrapped in blankets. You have a whole community here, Jia said, amazed. Han nodded. What's left of it? We've been hiding since the invasion, fighting when we can. A woman brought them bowls of hot soup. Taiho couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a hot meal. Even Baek got a bowl, which he lapped up quickly. So why do you need radio equipment? Han asked as they ate. Taiho looked at Ja, who nodded. They could trust these people. We're going to the capital, Taiho explained, to kill the overseer. The room went quiet. People stared at them like they were crazy. That's suicide, Han said. The capital is crawling with Null. Their biggest ship sits right in the center of the city. No one gets near it. We have a plan, Jia said. She explained about Baek's ability to disrupt the Null's telepathic communication. To prove it, she asked Baek to howl. When he did, a nearby radio crackled with static. Several people gasped. We need to amplify his howls, Jia continued. With the right equipment, we can create a device that will block the Overseer's control over its soldiers. Han looked skeptical. And then what? Even confused, the Null are dangerous. But beatable, Taiho said. Without orders, they won't work together. We can get close enough to kill the Overseer. Han paced the room, thinking. We've been hitting small patrols, stealing supplies, but nothing we do seems to matter. The Null just keep coming. He stopped and looked at them. Your plan is crazy, but maybe crazy is what we need. He called over an older man with glasses. This is Do Yoon. He was our town's radio technician before the invasion. Do Yoon examined Baek with interest. A wolf that disrupts signals. Fascinating. He turned to Ja. I can help you build what you need. We have parts here. While Do Yoon and Ja worked on the device, Han showed Taiho a map of the capital. This is what we know about Null positions, Han said, pointing to marked areas. They control the main roads, the center city, and the river docks. But the old subway tunnels might still be clear. We've never tried them. Taiho traced a path with his finger. If we can get in through here, we might reach the central ship without being seen. Han nodded slowly. It could work. He looked at Taiho. My people have been waiting for a chance to really hurt the Null. If you're serious about this mission, we want to help. Taiho was surprised. It will be dangerous. Living is dangerous now, Han replied with a grim smile. At least this way, we're fighting back. By morning, Jia and Do Yoon had built a device that could amplify Baek's howls. They tested it outside the town, and the results were better than expected. The sound waves disrupted all electronic equipment within 100 yards. It works, Jia said, her eyes bright with excitement. Now we just need to get close enough to the Overseer. Taiho looked at the small group of fighters Han had gathered. They weren't soldiers, but they were brave. With Baek's power and their help, maybe they had a chance. We leave for the capital at nightfall, Taiho announced. Get ready. 3 days of careful travel brought them to the outskirts of the capital. Taiho, Ja, Baek, and 6 fighters from Han's group hid in an abandoned building, looking at the city below them. The once beautiful skyline was now dominated by the massive Null command ship. It hovered over the center of the city, connected to the ground by thick cables. Smaller ships flew around it like insects around a hive. "There it is," Han whispered. "The Overseer's ship." Tai-Ho studied the city through binoculars. Null patrols moved along the main streets. Work camps had been set up in what used to be parks. Humans carried materials to and from the massive ship. "The subway entrance is 2 blocks from here," Han said, pointing to a map. "If it's clear, we can move under the city without being seen." As night fell, they moved quietly through empty streets. Buck went ahead, his enhanced senses alert for danger. The wolf stopped suddenly, growling softly. Tai-Ho raised his hand, signaling everyone to freeze. Around the corner, a Null patrol marched past. The alien's hard shells gleamed in the moonlight. Their many legs made a clicking sound on the pavement. When the patrol was gone, the group continued to the subway entrance. The door was locked, but Han's people broke it open. They slipped inside, closing the door behind them. The subway tunnel was dark and silent. Jub turned on a small light, careful to keep it pointed at the ground. "According to the map, we need to follow this tunnel for 2 miles, she whispered. "It should take us right under the center of the city." They moved in single file, with Bike leading the way. The wolf's eyes could see in the dark better than any human's. The tunnel was mostly clear, though they had to climb over a collapsed section at one point. After an hour of walking, they reached a station beneath the city center. Han checked the map again. "We need to go up to street level soon," he said. "There should be a maintenance tunnel that leads to the area under the command ship." They climbed the old escalators to the station platform. Tai-Ho peeked through a crack in the boarded-up entrance. The street outside was patrolled by Null soldiers. "We need a distraction," Tai-Ho said. Han nodded. "My people can help with that." He turned to 2 of his fighters. "Set off the charges at the east end of the city. That should draw some of them away." The 2 fighters nodded and slipped back into the tunnel. The rest of the group waited in tense silence. 20 minutes later, they heard distant explosions. Many of the Null guards ran toward the sound. "Now," Tai-Ho said. They rushed out of the station and across the street to a utility entrance. Inside, they found a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the central plaza where the command ship was anchored. As they got closer to the ship, Vake became more alert. His fur stood on end, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "He can sense the Overseer," Jia whispered. At the end of the tunnel, they found a hatch that led up to the surface. Tai-Ho climbed up first and looked around. They were just behind the massive cables that connected the ship to the ground. "This is it," he said, climbing back down. "The ship is right above us, but there are guards everywhere." Jia took out the device she and Du-Yun had built. It was connected to a small microphone. "When Buck howls into this, it will amplify the effect and disrupt their communication," she explained. "But we'll only have a few minutes before they figure out what's happening." Tai-Ho nodded. "So we need to move fast." He looked at the group. "Han, you and your people create a diversion at the main entrance. Jia, Bike, and I will use the confusion to slip inside the ship." "How will you find the Overseer?" Han asked. "Bak can sense it," Tai-Ho replied. "He'll lead us there." They synchronized their watches. In 10 minutes, Han's group would attack the front while Tai-Ho, Jia, and Bak would enter through a side access point. As they waited, Tai-Ho checked his weapon one last time. Beside him, Bake stood ready, his yellow eyes fixed on the hatch above them. "Are you scared?" Jia asked quietly. Tai-Ho thought for a moment. "Yes," he admitted, "but fear keeps you sharp." The minutes ticked by. Then it was time. "Let's go," Tai-Ho said. For Earth, the sound of gunfire erupted at the front of the ship. Han's team had begun their attack. Null guards rushed toward the noise, leaving the side entrance less protected. "Now," Tai-Ho whispered. They climbed out of the tunnel and ran to the ship. 2 Null guards spotted them. but Tahoe shot them before they could raise an alarm. The side door of the ship was locked, but Jia used a device she had made to override it. "Hurry," she said as the door slid open. Inside, the ship was unlike anything they had seen before. The walls pulsed with a strange blue light. The air was thick and smelled like metal and something rotten. Bake sniffed the ground, then looked up at Tahoe. The wolf seemed to know where to go. "Lead the way, boy," Tahoe said. They moved through narrow corridors, hiding whenever Null soldiers passed by. The ship was huge, with many levels connected by sloping ramps instead of stairs. "The overseer will be at the center," Jia whispered. "That's where they always position themselves." Bake led them deeper into the ship. As they moved, Tahoe noticed something strange about the walls. They weren't made of metal as he had thought. They seemed almost alive. "Jia," he whispered, "what is this ship made of?" Jia touched a wall carefully. "It's organic. The Null grow their ships. They don't build them." They reached a large door that blocked their path. Buck growled softly at it. "The overseer must be beyond this door," Jia said. But before they could figure out how to open it, another door to their right slid open. Thinking fast, they ducked inside to avoid being seen by a passing patrol. What they found made them freeze in horror. The room was filled with glass pods. Inside each pod was a human, connected to the ship by tubes and wires. Most were unconscious, but some had their eyes open, staring blankly ahead. "What is this?" Tahoe asked, his voice shaking. Jia moved closer to one of the pods. Her face went pale. "They're using humans as part of the ship," she whispered. "Our brains, they're connected to the ship's systems." Tahoe looked around the room. There were at least 50 pods, maybe more. "Can we free them?" he asked. Jia examined the nearest pod. "Maybe, but it could kill them if we do it wrong." She pointed to a control panel. "Let me see if I can figure this out." While Jia worked on the panel, Tahoe and Bake kept watch at the door. The sounds of fighting were still coming from outside the ship, but fainter now. "I hope Han and the others are okay," Tahoe said. Suddenly, Bak's ears perked up. He growled, looking toward the ceiling. A moment later, an alarm began to sound throughout the ship. "They know we're here," Tahoe said. "We need to move." "Wait," Jia said. She was still working on the control panel. "I think I can disconnect some of them." The pods nearest to her hissed open. The humans inside began to stir, coughing and confused. "Help them," Jia told Tahoe. "I'll free as many as I can." Tahoe helped a man out of his pod. The man was weak, barely able to stand. "What's your name?" Tahoe asked. "Jin," the man replied in a raspy voice. "Where am I?" "On a Null ship. We're here to destroy it." Jin's eyes widened. "The overseer. It's in the central chamber. I've seen it. In my mind." More pods opened as Jia worked. Soon a dozen confused humans were standing in the room. "Can you walk?" Tahoe asked them. Most nodded weakly. "Then follow us. We're getting out of here." Bake growled louder, facing the door. Footsteps were approaching. "We're out of time," Tahoe said. He turned to Jia. "We need to reach the overseer now." Jia nodded. "Jin, can you help the others get out of the ship? Use the way we came in." Jin nodded. "What about you?" "We're going to finish what we came for," Tahoe said. As Jin led the free humans away, Tahoe, Jia, and Bake moved toward the large door they had seen earlier. The alarm was still blaring, and they could hear Null soldiers approaching from multiple directions. "Ready?" Tahoe asked, lifting his rifle. Jia nodded and held up the sound device. Bak's howl should disrupt their systems enough for us to get through. Bake looked up at them, his yellow eyes determined. The wolf seemed to understand exactly what was at stake. "Now, Bake," Tahoe commanded. "Howl." Buck threw his head back and howled. The sound echoed through the ship, amplified by Jia's device. The effect was immediate. The blue lights in the walls flickered. The alarm stopped mid-wail. Nearby, they heard Knoll soldiers making confused clicking sounds. "It's working," Gia said. The large door in front of them slid open on its own. Without hesitation, they rushed inside. The central chamber was huge. The ceiling rose high above them, glowing with the same blue light as the rest of the ship. But what caught their attention was the creature at the center of the room. The overseer was nothing like the Knoll soldiers they had seen before. It was massive, at least 3 times larger. Its body had multiple sections, each covered in a hard shell. Instead of the 4 limbs the soldiers had, the overseer had dozens, some ending in claws, others in what looked like tools. Its head was enormous, with compound eyes that glittered in the blue light. Most disturbing of all, the overseer was physically connected to the ship. Tubes and cables ran from its body into the walls and floor. The creature turned toward them, its eyes focusing on Buck. "The disrupting one," it said in a hissing voice that somehow formed human words. "We have been looking for you." Taiho raised his rifle, but before he could fire, a wave of pain hit his mind. Images flashed before his eyes. Earth burning, humans dying, the last cities falling to the Knoll invasion. "You are too late," the overseer's voice echoed in his head. "Your kind is finished. This planet is ours now." Taiho fell to his knees, the rifle slipping from his hands. Beside him, Gia clutched her head, her face twisted in pain. Only Bake seemed unaffected. The wolf stood firm, growling at the massive alien. The overseer turned its attention fully to Bake. "Interesting. Your mind is different. Simple, yet strong." Bake's growl deepened. He took a step forward, then another. The overseer raised one of its limbs, preparing to strike the wolf. Through his pain, Taiho reached for the device Jia had built. His fingers closed around it. "Bake," he managed to say. "Howl." The wolf obeyed. This time, with the device right in the central chamber, the effect was devastating. The overseer writhed in pain, its limbs thrashing. The blue lights in the walls turned red. The mental attack on Taiho and Gia stopped. Taiho grabbed his rifle and fired at the tubes connecting the overseer to the ship. Thick fluid sprayed from the broken connections. The overseer screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and lashed out with its claws. One caught Taiho on the arm, cutting deep. He cried out but kept firing. Bake leaped forward, his powerful jaws clamping down on one of the overseer's limbs. The wolf's enhanced strength let him tear the limb completely off. Jia had recovered now too. She grabbed a fallen Knoll weapon and fired it at the overseer's head. The alien's hard shell cracked under the assault. "Keep firing," Taiho shouted. "We're hurting it." The overseer thrashed in pain and rage. "You will die with me," it hissed. The ship around them shuddered. "This vessel will self-destruct and take your city with it." A countdown appeared on the walls, showing alien symbols that were counting down fast. "We need to stop it," Jia shouted. Taiho looked around frantically. At the back of the chamber, he saw a console similar to the one Jia had used to free the humans. "There," he pointed. "Maybe we can stop the countdown." But the overseer blocked their path, its remaining limbs slashing at them. Buck darted in, biting and tearing whenever he could, but even his enhanced strength wasn't enough. "We need to kill it first," Jia said. "The countdown should stop if the overseer dies." Taiho nodded. He noticed that each time Bake howled, the overseer seemed weakest where the tubes connected to its body. "The connection points," he shouted to Jia. "Aim for where it connects to the ship." They concentrated their fire on these spots. The overseer screamed again as more tubes broke free. Its body began to sag, no longer supported by the ship's systems. Bake howled once more, the sound piercing through everything. The overseer's body convulsed. Then, with a final desperate lunge, it reached for Taiho. Taiho was knocked to the ground, the overseer's weight crushing him. He could barely breathe. The alien's face was inches from his, its jaws opening wide. Then Bake was there, tearing at the overseer's exposed neck. Jia fired round after round into its head. With a final shudder, the massive creature went still. The countdown stopped. The red lights returned to blue, then dimmed. Jia helped push the dead overseer off Taiho. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "We actually did it." Taiho sat on the steps of the command ship, watching the sunrise. His arm was bandaged where the overseer had cut him. Beck lay beside him, the wolf's head resting on his lap. Jia was inside the ship, working with the freed humans. All around them, confusion reigned. Null soldiers wandered aimlessly, making clicking sounds but not attacking. Without the overseer to guide them, they seemed lost. Han approached, limping slightly. His attack on the front of the ship had succeeded, but at a cost. Only 3 of his 6 fighters had survived. "You actually did it," Han said, sitting next to Taiho. "The Null are just standing around. Some are even walking in circles. The overseer controlled them all," Taiho explained. "Without it, they don't know what to do." Han looked up at the massive ship. "What about the other cities? The other overseers?" Before Taiho could answer, Jia emerged from the ship with Jin and several other freed humans. She carried a null communication device. "I have news," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We found a way to use the ship's communication system. We've been in contact with other human groups around the world." "There are more survivors?" Taiho asked. Jia nodded. "Many more, and they've been fighting too. When we told them how we defeated the overseer, they couldn't believe it." She held up the device. "We're sharing Bak's howl frequency with everyone. They're already planning attacks on other null command ships." Taiho stroked Bak's fur. The wolf had been the key to their victory. The null had never expected a simple earth animal, even an enhanced one, to be their downfall. "What about the humans connected to the ship?" Han asked. "We've freed most of them," Jin said. "Some were too far gone, but many will recover." He looked at Taiho gratefully. "You saved us all." People began to gather around the ship. Word of the overseer's death had spread quickly. Humans emerged from hiding places throughout the city, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the confused Null. By midday, the central plaza was filled with people. Some were from Han's group. Others were escaped workers from the Null camps. All looked to Taiho, Jia, and Bak with hope. Taiho stood on the steps of the ship, Bulk at his side. The crowd fell silent, waiting for him to speak. "Today, we showed that the Null can be beaten," he said simply. "We are stronger than they thought, smarter than they expected, and we will take back our world." The crowd cheered. Some people cried. Others hugged each other. For the first time since the invasion, they had hope. Jia joined Taiho on the steps. "The ship's systems are ours now," she said. "We can use their own technology against them." "And Bak's howl," Taiho added, looking down at his wolf companion. "We need to find more enhanced animals if we can." As if in answer, a distant howl echoed from the hills beyond the city. Bak's ears perked up. He stood, listening. Then he threw back his head and howled in response. Another howl answered, then another. More enhanced wolves had survived the invasion. They were coming to join the fight. "It's just the beginning," Jia said softly. The Null thought they had won. They never expected a human and his wolf to be their undoing. Taiho nodded. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There were more overseers to kill, more command ships to take. But for the first time, he believed humans could win this war. In the weeks that followed, the news spread across the world. City by city, humans rose up against the confused Null forces. Enhanced animals, wolves, dogs, even some cats, were found and brought to the fight. Their unique abilities, combined with human determination, turned the tide of the invasion. 1 year after Taiho, Ja, and Bake killed the first overseer. The last Nul ship left Earth's atmosphere, fleeing back to the stars. Standing on a hilltop, watching the ship disappear, Tai-Ho patted Bak's head. "We did it, boy. We won." Bake looked up at him with intelligent eyes that seemed to say, "I never doubted we would." The Earth was free again, and it had a human and his wolf to thank. Tai-Ho sat on the steps of the command ship, watching the sunrise. His arm was bandaged where the overseer had cut him. Bek lay beside him, the wolf's head resting on his lap. Ja was inside the ship, working with the freed humans. All around them, confusion reigned. Null soldiers wandered aimlessly, making clicking sounds but not attacking. Without the overseer to guide them, they seemed lost. Han approached, limping slightly. His attack on the front of the ship had succeeded, but at a cost. Only 3 of his 6 fighters had survived. "You actually did it," Han said, sitting next to Tai-Ho. "The Nul are just standing around. Some are even walking in circles. The overseer controlled them all," Tai-Ho explained. "Without it, they don't know what to do." Han looked up at the massive ship. "What about the other cities? The other overseers?" Before Tai-Ho could answer, Jia emerged from the ship with Jin and several other freed humans. She carried a null communication device. "I have news," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "We found a way to use the ship's communication system. We've been in contact with other human groups around the world." "There are more survivors?" Tai-Ho asked. Jia nodded. "Many more, and they've been fighting too. When we told them how we defeated the overseer, they couldn't believe it." She held up the device. "We're sharing Bak's howl frequency with everyone. They're already planning attacks on other Null command ships." Tai-Ho stroked Bak's fur. The wolf had been the key to their victory. The Null had never expected a simple Earth animal, even an enhanced one, to be their downfall. "What about the humans connected to the ship?" Han asked. "We've freed most of them," Jin said. "Some were too far gone, but many will recover." He looked at Tai-Ho gratefully. "You saved us all." People began to gather around the ship. Word of the overseer's death had spread quickly. Humans emerged from hiding places throughout the city, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence as they saw the confused Null. By midday, the central plaza was filled with people. Some were from Han's group. Others were escaped workers from the Null camps. All looked to Tai-Ho, Ja, and Bak with hope. Tai-Ho stood on the steps of the ship, Bulk at his side. The crowd fell silent, waiting for him to speak. "Today, we showed that the Null can be beaten," he said simply. "We are stronger than they thought, smarter than they expected, and we will take back our world." The crowd cheered. Some people cried. Others hugged each other. For the first time since the invasion, they had hope. Jia joined Tai-Ho on the steps. "The ship's systems are ours now," she said. "We can use their own technology against them." "And Bak's howl," Tai-Ho added, looking down at his wolf companion. "We need to find more enhanced animals if we can." As if in answer, a distant howl echoed from the hills beyond the city. Bak's ears perked up. He stood, listening. Then he threw back his head and howled in response. Another howl answered, then another. More enhanced wolves had survived the invasion. They were coming to join the fight. "It's just the beginning," Jia said softly. The Null thought they had won. They never expected a human and his wolf to be their undoing. Tai-Ho nodded. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There were more overseers to kill, more command ships to take. But for the first time, he believed humans could win this war. In the weeks that followed, the news spread across the world. City by city, humans rose up against the confused Null forces. Enhanced animals, wolves, dogs, even some cats, were found and brought to the fight. Their unique abilities, combined with human determination, turned the tide of the invasion. 1 year after Tai-Ho, Ja, and Bake killed the first overseer, the last Null ship left Earth's atmosphere, fleeing back to the stars. Standing on a hilltop, watching the ship disappear, Tai-ho patted Bak's head. "We did it, boy. We won." Bake looked up at him with intelligent eyes that seemed to say, "I never doubted we would." The earth was free again, and it had a human and his wolf to thank.